Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is one of the many content pieces that ActiveProspect has put together and will continue in the weeks and months ahead as we help the lead generation and performance marketing industry navigate the most recent update and rules in and around the TCPA, or Telephone Consumer Protection Act, including one-to-one consent, notice opt-in, and updated record-keeping requirements by lead sellers and lead buyers. We believe the content we are assembling will help you decode these changes with more confidence and a focus on compliance. Today's topic: FCC, FTC, State Attorney General, fastballs, curveballs, and change-ups, TCPA compliance strategies for call centers and the lead generation ecosystem. Special note to the baseball theme today, as tomorrow is Major League Baseball's opening day from a super fan here, so I am excited about that as well. So some housekeeping items. On our platform, there is a chat icon in the upper right. There's also a questions icon. Please use the chat section for general comments and interactions with other participants, and please use the question section if there are items you would like to pose to us. Also, there's a poll icon, which we will use during the session today. We're going to leave time at the end for review and respond to these questions, but we'll also do our best to keep an eye on the questions and provide some quick answers throughout if we're able to. And a link to the live recording will be emailed shortly after the session today. Hello, I'm Benjamin Farrar. I'm the Director of Privacy, Security, and Compliance at ActiveProspect. And for the last 10 plus years, I have worked for companies in the performance marketing, advertising agency, and market research space, including WPP, Kantar, and Dentsu. Much focus during that time was on privacy and data regulation compliance. And before that, I worked at Ernst & Young in New York as an IT controls auditor in financial services, and then on the firm's data privacy compliance team. I started my career at Arsenal Clinic Hospital in New Orleans, Louisiana, in internal auditing, focused on, of course, healthcare and insurance. In all my previous roles, they were in functions and departments focused on legal, compliance, privacy, IT audit, data security, and one clear theme has followed throughout. In every one of these industries and jobs, a significant data regulation or law was passed, and I was in the team responsible for reviewing and translating these new rules to seek clarity and establishing a compliance program. So things such as HIPAA, SOX, GDPR, state and country data privacy laws, as well as industry-specific data regulations. And now for a brief background and introduction, I would like to pass the mic to my co-host today, Isaac Shloss, Chief Product Officer at Contact Compliance Center. Isaac, hello.
Hello, and thank you for that. And great job on saying my last name properly. You know, for those of you who don't know this, I didn't coach him on that. He got it right first try. So bravo, bravo. I'm Isaac Shloss. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Contact Center Compliance, and I've been in the contact center industry for probably about 25 years now. I've worked primarily contact center companies, my first one being Teleperformance, which is one of the largest BPOs in the world. And managing IT has always kind of thrust compliance on my shoulders because at a lot of businesses, they want compliance to be automated. And you know, that's probably a different topic for another day as to whether or not you can actually accomplish that. But obviously, technology plays a pivotal role in successful compliance controls. So it was a very natural transition for me to get involved with government affairs for various industry trade groups such as PACE and REACH, and as well as, you know, come here to help drive product creation for compliance solutions.
Excellent, Isaac. Really happy to have you here today, a subject matter expert, and looking forward to our conversation. So let's start. We've got a wide audience of people here that usually attends our sessions. So let's start with a poll question. So make sure you look at that poll section for everyone. So it's just trying to identify who's out there in our audience. So if you can identify, what is your primary position in the lead generation ecosystem? Understanding some of you could fit in different roles, but we're just trying to classify here. So are you a website publisher or lead seller? Are you a brand or service that's a lead buyer? Are you in call center services? Are you a lead aggregator, or perhaps a technology service provider, or even a digital marketing agency, or some other classification there? So look forward to the responses in the poll question as soon as it comes up. But again, Isaac, since like I said, our audience is wide variety, and we're trying to provide some education here, I'd love for you to help explain to our individuals here a key topic about call tracebacks, call blocking, spam likely labeling. I know we as a consumer, I see this regularly on our phone calls as things are being passed to us, but I'd love for you to help us give us some education on what are all these components and their importance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's start with some of the easier items like the call blocking and labeling. We all, as businesses and even as individuals, have a message we want to put out there to our audience. And that message could be something as simple as, hey, I've got this new product you're interested in, or hey, somebody's trying to make a fraudulent charge to your credit card account. We have to reach our consumers for one reason or another. And what we have seen for the last, I'd say, 5, 6 years now is a much more aggressive move from the carriers to start filtering out calls that they don't feel consumers want to get. And they're doing that by putting a spam logo on a majority of those calls. So they're saying, hey, you probably don't want to get this spam. And I'm sure if we had a poll around this, we could ask the question, how likely are you to answer your call when it says spam likely? But to be honest, I'm sure 99% of you would vote, I'm not going to answer it. So there's really no point to that. So no one wants to walk into a conversation being told that you don't want to be talked to. It can get much more aggressive where the carriers can decide, what, this isn't just spam. This isn't just something that I don't think that you want to hear. I think this is a bad actor, so I'm just going to stop this call from getting through altogether. So that is what is commonly referred to as blocking, where they stop the call, and labeling, where they label you as spam, or at some carriers you'll even see scam with a C put on there. And that's troubling because it really just cripples your answer rates as a caller. Traceback requests are related but different. A traceback request is going to happen typically when there's some sort of official investigation trying to figure out whether or not you're a bad actor. And there's a lot of different things that can set off that type of investigation. But in the simplest terms, the carriers are going to be responsible for providing the investigating agency. Typically the industry traceback group is the one pushing this for the chain of custody, if you will, of the call. So, I've got Verizon for my cell phone service. I've got an Android. Please don't judge me for that. But when I get my call on my Verizon phone, it doesn't mean the originator was Verizon. Verizon may have gotten that call from, say, AT&T, who got it from MCI, if they still exist, who got it from Windstream, who got it from this company and that company. So Traceback lets you follow the breadcrumbs back to the originating source so that if there is an enforcement action that needs to happen, they have a better idea of who to go after. If it came from a foreign entity, they know who the gatekeeper was that let it into the US to address it with them. And sometimes with a traceback request, they find out, hey, there's nothing fraudulent here at all. There's nothing wrong here. They do their investigation and they say, okay, everything's fine here. Thank you for participating.
And call tracebacks, I believe I've heard there's a pretty quick turnaround or a deadline if a company receives those in this space to provide some information back. Is that correct?
It is, and that window keeps shrinking. I believe the latest rule change puts it at 24 hours. You want to try to, my advice is always get that out in a couple of hours. That way you don't push the envelope. There's my kids are all procrastinators. I always say, hey, do it the day before you find out about it. But with these traceback requests, if you follow a lot of the blog posts that are out there that talk about stories where there's a traceback involved with somebody who's getting sued or facing criminal action, somewhere in that story, you're usually going to find something that says, and they got all these traceback requests that they ignored. So don't ignore them, respond as timely as possible, and make sure you don't have them going to one email box. Don't have them going to Isaac Shloss or, DNC.com or, have a distro group so that when people are out of the office, when people are on vacation, sick, whatever, someone is always responding to that as their top priority.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Great advice. And it sounds like the call blocking and spam likely labeling, companies that are doing this generally can be pulled into that space too, and have to sort of identify that it's actually not that way and it needs an action or some reclassification. Is that correct?
It is. And the way you get labeled as a spammer, there's a lot of different things that can lead to that. But one of the key points that can lead to that, or one of the many points, is calling into too many honeypots. And that's something that we may try to cover a little bit more later. But when you get into that honeypot environment, the the regulators are seeing you as potentially somebody who's a non-compliant actor, and that could generate those investigations. Now, there's a lot more that could lead to it. I'm oversimplifying it, but it is all related.
And you all have some great solutions. I mean, that's the space which you all are operating in to help brands and companies and call centers that are making those outbound calls to give identification as to whether this is likely or response actions and a number of services in that area, correct?
Absolutely. So we've got two main priorities as a business. One is helping businesses become compliant and stay compliant. The second is trying to help you maximize your call deliverability, how often your call actually makes it to the consumer with a positive reputation. Now, in order to qualify for that second series of products where we help with your call deliverability, you have to prove that you're a compliant organization. It helps if you use some of our solutions because we know and are familiar with what you do as a business, but it's certainly not a requirement. But you must be a compliant organization. You go through a relatively extensive vetting process with us that we don't charge you for, but once you've been approved for those services, then we can help you when you're unfortunately thrown into those categories with the bad actors. It's funny, they've got a lot of algorithms for it, and the algorithms will quite often classify you incorrectly. A great example to share of this, I've got a client who they're a well-known national brand, perhaps a global brand, and they were running into that a lot on their collections lines of business. And the reason for the carriers is, well, you're not calling these people every single day. You're calling every other day. They said, well, yeah, it's collections, but it doesn't really do the consumer any good or help anything if I call them every day. So our strategy is every other day. And one of the carriers that was really stonewalling on removing the spam tag, we're meeting with them. We had to escalate it. They said, oh, well, that's what bad actors do. And I'd explained to them, yeah, but that's also what good actors do. So there's education the carriers need to help understand normal calling practices.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad you all do that service, because I think it's probably daunting for smaller, medium-sized players in this space that suddenly realize they're pulled into this. But as your advice was, make sure you have respond quickly. Make sure you're thoughtful in your responses. There's guidance and things that are communicated, and it may be easily reclassified. You just need to be prompt when you're responding to their request for further information.
Absolutely, absolutely. Time is of the essence, and any good attorney will tell you defendable position. Always have yourself in a defendable position. So things like cooperating with traceback requests tend to help. I mean, that's a small part of it, but that tends to help with that defendable position. You're saying, hey, I'm doing my very best to be a good actor. And depending on who you're dealing with, if you're cooperating, if you're showing policy, if you're showing that you try, a lot of times the first time there's an issue, if it is a genuine oversight, you'll get away with, a stern talking to. And as long as they don't have to talk to you again in 5 years, you're good to go.
Excellent. Okay, so going back to our poll, like I thought, we've got a wide selection of audience. Our biggest group are their brands or service lead buyers, 23% that is out there. Next, those are in call center services, 19%. We've got some lead aggregators out there as well, technology service providers, and then digital marketing agencies here as well, and then website publishers or lead sellers. And then, of course, there's a collection of others. So that's reflective for who's out there. I wanted to shift a little bit to record keeping requirements. And in the TCPA, with the February and January announcement of the directed mostly for what the FCC said, closing the lead generator loophole, we want to make sure that everyone understands that documenting consent is very important on your website, on your web form. We have a great solution for that, trusted form that can help document that transaction. And it's critically important, but want to make people aware that it's not just the lead sellers, but it's also the lead buyers. That's one of the key components and changes in that update. It's one-to-one consent, but it's also both sides having possession of the consent, record of consent, really before you're performing the outreach. So I want to encourage everyone. I think we'll provide a link to our trusted form solution here. This works with first parties, with third parties in the lead ad experiences as well. And make sure that you explore our trusted form solutions for certify, verify, retain, and insights, which can all help you in different ways. But for record keeping requirements, there's also been a focus by the FTC, right, with the TSR updates, the telemarketing sales rules. very recently announced. Perhaps you can tell us more about that, Isaac.
Yeah, it's important that everybody keeps in mind that for a lot of us that are on this call, the two big pieces of legislation at the federal level are the TSR and the TCPA. A lot of people are more focused on the TCPA because it's got that nasty private right of action that gets a lot of people in trouble, or at least bothers them with frivolous demand letters. But the TSR is in many ways a supporting piece of regulation that supports the TCPA. For example, the do not call list is technically created and enforced by the TSR, but that was done to support a provision of the TCPA. So there's always that unity between the two regulations. I think when we go back to the comment I made earlier about a defendable position, I think a lot of that is driving this record-keeping changes that we're seeing in both pieces, or both acts, TSR and TCPA. And that is that, you can't hide behind the fact that, well, I didn't know. They told me it was good, so I've got a contract that says everything's going to be good. That's good enough for me. That's not good enough. You have to know your buyer. We've been told for years now by the FTC, know your customer, KYC, KYC. Over the last few years, you've seen a big shift from a lot of them saying, yeah, KYC, we're not diminishing that at all, but know your vendor, KYV, start focusing on know your vendor practices. So I think that's a big part of this. So with the TCPA, the big piece of it, of course, is that you have to have proof of consent. And there's going to be a couple of reasons for that. One of the bigger ones is when there is one of these investigations, when they're looking into things. And I ran into this with a traceback request with a client of mine just a few weeks ago. It took them a while to be able to provide any sort of verification from the record being filled out because they didn't have the right records in place. They had to figure out who to talk to from their lead source. It was a mess. The government wants it to be to where if you get asked for proof of consent, you can pop it up right there. So that's the really big thing, is as a lead buyer, make sure you have that proof of consent. Stop just taking the word of your lead buyer. Make sure that they have not only that proof of consent for you, but they've got the proper technology in place to help gain consent and to prove that consent is real. Now, the TSR has made a lot of changes as well, and I'm going to focus on 4 key points. And a lot of this has to do with how you're scrubbing against the do not call list. So one of those, because if you have consent to call someone, then your DNC stuff becomes a little less impactful. But there could be, depending on what type of consent you feel you have or an exemption you have, like an EBR or something like that, that can expire. So you'll want to make sure that if you're checking the do not call list, if you're required to check the do not call list, you hold on to 4 key pieces of information. One, the name of the entity that accessed the registry. Now that's entity is a generic term. If when you look at the TSR text, there's a lot of stuff where you say, well, what exactly does that mean? FTC has a great FAQ page that clarifies a lot of that, and they update it pretty regularly. So, make sure you're checking between both. But I looked up the definition of entity, and I wasn't finding a very clear understanding. By and large, it appeared to refer to the seller, but there were a couple places where I could see that a company such as myself that processes do not call scripts on behalf of our clients might be considered an entity. So I would recommend that you are tracking yourself as a seller. If you're having a third-party agency like a BPO, a call center company, do your calling for you and they're scrubbing, have that tracked. If you're using a solution provider such as us to simplify your DNC scrubbing process, make sure you're tracking that as well. So that's the first big one. Second one, date that you access the registry, plain and simple. When did you do it? That's important because you could say, hey, I checked and they weren't on the DNC list. But if I checked on February 1st and they added themselves on February 17th, and now today is March 20, whatever, I should have checked already, or I should have checked again, because you've got that short window to 10 days to verify they're on the do not call list and honor that. So make sure that you're keeping track of that date so you can show that. The third one, and this is becoming very, very important right now, is the subscription account number or SAN number that was used. Now, this is something that we're seeing a lot more of from the FTC, and I would encourage anybody out there who is scrubbing to examine your usage of your SAN number. There are some providers out there, some of our competitors or some dialers that try to bundle the SAN subscription into their product or say, oh, you don't need to go get your own SAN, we'll cover that for you. Everything I have seen says that that is not allowed. That is not true. And there's a very good possibility you're sharing a SAN number, which is clearly disallowed, or they're just, whatever provider you're working with is using their own, which is clearly disallowed. If you don't have your own SAN number, you are violating the TSR, and anything you scrub, the FTC will consider it as not scrubbed. They've been issuing rulings lately, or there's been cases where they settled. I wrote a blog about this recently about XCast. This is on our website, dnc.com, and our blog page, where in the ruling, it has a prohibition on XCast for allowing customers to come in that don't have a valid SAN, which is interesting because XCast was never accused of doing that in the allegations from the FTC, but the FTC saw a point to point that out. So I think they know it's happening. I have a feeling that there's an investigation coming. So if you don't have your own SAN number, you could be in a lot of trouble. So I would recommend you put that at the top of your list of things you look into. And then the final thing is just what campaign you have associated with your scrubbing request. Campaigns have a somewhat loose definition when we're talking from a legal perspective, but by and large, if I have a consumer, if I'm calling Isaac because I'm trying to sell him a new car, and then in 6 months I'm calling him because he didn't pay for that car, and it's a collections effort, those are clearly different campaigns. So make sure that you're tracking them separately, and that can really benefit you because there are potentially different rules that can affect you if it's a sales and marketing versus an account or informational message. So between the two, that would be the record keeping I would focus on today.
That's great. Yeah. So a lot and more we'll be hearing about it in the weeks ahead as the TSR is unpacked. I mean, this is very, very recent news with the announcement from the FTC. I believe they had their open meeting. I think it was last week where they provide a little bit more information about their comments, but look forward to that. From an ActiveProspect side, I mean, looking at that, those are all call center specific items and important for the defense and documentation and compliance of the work that you're doing. But it's just, again, the importance of having your consent to contact documented and as the whole package and everything that's part of the record keeping requirements. It's just absolutely critical to have along with those sides as those components as well. And there's some other tools and services. We have a great relationship with you all. We have an integrations page through our lead conduit solution. We also have some add-in tools that are available. So if you're an ActiveProspect client using lead conduit, you can connect in many of the services that you all have. And you could roll through a few of those, but DNC scrub was one. A disconnect scrub is another one. TCPA reassigned authority, I think that's for reassigned numbers, and then litigator scrub. Would love you to share more about each one of those a little bit and their importance and use.
Yeah, I'll start by also touching on a couple of questions I saw in there. I saw, one of the questions from the audience was, does the lead buyer or the lead seller need the SAN number? Realistically, from the federal definition, it is the seller. So that would most likely be the buyer. So whoever's buying the lead, because they are selling a product or service, they need that SAN number. If you have a third party scrubbing for you, like let's say you tell your lead buyer, I want you to scrub all phone numbers before I buy them and only sell me ones that aren't on the do not call list, the lead source would need to use your SAN number, not their own, your SAN number to make that check. So that's a very important thing. You can authorize companies to use your SAN number to scrub on your behalf, but they have to be scrubbing only to help you be compliant with the do not call list. So very important there. So our do not call scrubbing product is really how our company started. I mean, we're contact center compliance, but our website is dnc.com. We've been in the game pretty much since the national do not call has started in 2003. That's how we're able to get this domain. But scrubbing that, I saw another question about monitoring opt-outs. It's an automated process. You send your leads on a regular basis to us, or you scrub real time when you're dialing, or you scrub while you're buying the lead. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can accomplish it, but it checks to see if that lead is on not just the national do not call list, but there are, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank, 11 or 13, I think 11 state do not call lists as well. So it checks those. You can also have your own internal do not call list. This is very important. You're a lead seller. Let's just say that you're Android, since I brought them up earlier. You're selling Android phones. You work for Google and or Samsung or whatever, and you call. And I'm calling someone who's not on the do not call list, but they just say, you know what, I don't want to talk to Samsung. So Samsung put me on your do not call list. You have to honor that request. So we have the ability for you to store your own internal do not call list with us. And then you could even use our EBR exemption capabilities where you can register customers that you have an EBR with, and it will take that into consideration when it's scrubbing it to do not call list. So it'll say, oh, yeah, Isaac Shloss, he's on the national do not call list, but I see you have, he's a current customer of yours. He's in a state that honors EBR, because not all states do. He's in a state that honors EBR, so you can go ahead and call him. Disconnect, scrub, and reassign really go hand in hand. When we're calling people, I mean, first and foremost, in this day and age, we're doing targeted sales. We're not just picking up the phone book and calling every single phone number that's out there. We have very specific buyers or existing customers that we're looking to target. Now, with a lot of the technology that's used, you're going to be required to have consent to communicate with these people, especially if you're using pre-recorded messages. You definitely need consent. And you might have all the checks in place. You may have done everything right when you filled out the lead form. You've got all the technology proving that it was a real person. It's a valid lead. Everything's good. And then that consumer gives up their phone number. You automatically lose your consent as soon as they give up that phone number. And a lot of people don't think that far ahead. Right. Because there's no trigger, there's no push notification. I know if I were to get a new phone number, I wouldn't think to call every single person I've ever given my phone number to and say, hey, I've got a new phone number. I might send something in my contact list or post something on my social media and say, hey, I got a new phone number. If you still want to talk to me, snap me, text me, or well, you can't text me, snap me, Facebook me, whatever, and I'll give you my new phone number. So we have a database that we can track that looks to see if that number has been disconnected, if it's been reassigned and given back to the carriers. And that helps you out, because if you call that number and that number no longer belongs to the person who gave you consent, you could potentially be in violation of the TCPA and or TSR and have some real problems. So we can help you with that. Now, beyond that, I'm actually writing another blog, should be up in the next week or so on our website, but I mentioned a story from years ago. Forbes covered this, where a woman was going out and buying burner phones that she was targeting recently returned phone numbers, and she was just waiting for that phone to ring so she could turn around and file a TCPA lawsuit against the person who called them. And she was very successful. She's just one of many people who have tried this strategy. We maintain a proprietary database of litigators. We have a great integration with you guys on that one as well. And I think you mentioned that in your list, where we check to see if it's one of those known litigators. Now, there are a few companies out there that provide something similar. I could tell you with ours, every single person that we flag, we could show you some sort of demand letter, court filing, something official proving that that is who we say it is, because we don't just track names. We don't just track, oh, Isaac Shloss is a plaintiff. We know the difference between this Isaac Shloss and that Isaac Shloss when we identify them as a plaintiff or a potential plaintiff. And even if you paid, a good amount of money for that lead, not worth calling that lead, because it could turn into a $500, $1,500, demand letter, or heck, it could even turn into a class action if the person's really bold.
Yeah, and I heard a term you referenced, EBR, and for those not in that space, that's existing business relationship, right? Those are the rules that are defined in there that says, how long can I say I've already have an existing business relationship with this individual, right?
Correct. So there's an existing business relationship, and there's a couple of different kinds. The clearest one is they're a customer of mine. I've done business with them. I sold them something, and I believe the federal limitation on that is something like 18 months. Now, you've got to be careful, because while that exists at the federal level, states are allowed to preempt that and say, you know what, we don't like EBR. We don't see that as an exemption of the do not call list. Indiana is a great example of a state that does not honor EBR as an exemption. Now, there's a secondary kind that is inquiry. Inquiry is a little fuzzier and probably a topic for another time. It's a shorter window, but there are additional exemptions for a clear inquiry. But again, you have to be in a state that honors those types of exemptions.
Okay, excellent. And yeah, looking at the questions, taking a peek at one. There was one that came in. Does a trusted form opt-in certificate override the national DNC registration? So my understanding is you can be on the national DNC registration saying, I do not want to receive these calls. But the great part about having that record of consent, if someone opts in saying, you have permission to contact me about this product or service, that's the documentation that helps allow that. So the answer to that is yes, documenting that correctly. Now, there's always the thought that the language may or may not be appropriate. So that's the caveat. You still need seek legal advice. We're not giving legal advice here on this call, but more compliance conversations and topics. But generally, that is the structure if your consent language has been drafted appropriately and allows that mechanism for outreach.
Yeah, that's really that's the key takeaway, is that consumers may choose that they don't want to be inundated with hundreds of thousands of unsolicited telemarketing calls, targeted or not. They may not want them, but they may want to talk to your brand. They may be okay talking to you because you're not one of those guys. You're somebody I want to talk to. But consent language is key. Make sure you've got qualified, preferably, in my opinion, outside counsel. That way you get a little bit of extra protection from attorney-client privilege. But make sure that you are very regularly bringing in an expert to evaluate what you're doing.
Yeah, I'd like to, I know I attended the Arizona Summit a couple of weeks back. That was a great event that you all put in, and we did a lot deep dive in these. That's compliance folks there, legal as well. And there was a good, interesting discussion about honeypot risk, which I thought was interesting. And from an information security background, I knew the concept of a honeypot, but I think that you probably encounter customers that are surprised, in which they're getting sort of pulled into these explanations and saying, how did this happen? We're following all the rules that we have a compliance program. How did we get pulled into being questioned around this or a case file? Can you share some more about that?
Absolutely. So when a phone number, well, I guess let's back up a little bit. How do they know? How do the carriers know? And how do the apps, because aside from Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile having their own systems or vendors that identify spam callers, there's dozens of apps out there, Umail, Nomo, RoboKiller, just to name a few, that also do their own proprietary analysis of who's a spammer and who's not, and tracking all of that. How do they do it? A lot of them use honeypots, and there's a lot of different things, but honeypots, I want to focus on that. Honeypots are systems designed to draw in a bad actor, catch them, document them, and almost trap them in there. So there's a few different ways this is set up. You talk about some of those apps like Nomo, RoboKiller. They've gone out and they've bought thousands and thousands, and Umail, but I'll talk about them actually separately. They buy thousands of phone numbers. They never publish the phone numbers. They've owned them for a decade, and they track the people that are calling in, and they say, hey, I never gave consent. So if somebody's calling this phone number, then they must be a bad actor that are just spamming and calling people like crazy. Umail takes it to the next level. Umail's got something like 10 million on average that they've got. But Umail works a little bit differently from the other app companies. Umail, there's a couple other companies out there like this, partner with the carriers and say, hey, listen, when somebody gives a phone number back, legally, you're required to hold that phone number for at least 45 days before you can reassign it. So how about we redirect all those calls to one of our honeypot farms? And that way we could track people who are just randomly calling. And if we see really big patterns, maybe we'll refer those over to the ITG for some further investigation. So these honeypots are just, bottom line, systems that are out there that are designed to entice you, track you, get you to call them, and figure out who you are. They sometimes even use AI bots on the other end to answer that call and try to listen in on what you're saying and create a fake conversation with you to get more information about who you're calling about. I was interviewed by I think the Wall Street Journal a little bit ago, where we talked about a platform called the Jolly Roger that is designed to do that. I highly encourage everybody, if you want to laugh, Google them, listen to it. There's some funny recordings on their website. But these honeypots entrap you to try to figure out and detect who bad actors are. Now, it's very easy to avoid honeypots. Realistically speaking, make sure you're calling targeted people. You're not randomly or sequentially dialing. And two, well, actually 3 steps. 2, do a right party identification of some kind. We do offer product for that as well. where you can look into, does the PII that they specified, the name, the address, things like that, match the phone number that they put in there? Because if you get that mismatch, there's a good chance there's some lead fraud or somebody's trying to trick you or something like that. The third one is the disconnect and reassign scrubbing. When you check for that, there's a much less chance that you're going to be calling somebody who you shouldn't be calling, keeping you very safe and secure.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. And we have integrations and add-ons with disconnect scrub as well. So for ActiveProspect lead conduit customers and litigator scrub, which can be used in a variation of that. So that's great. Starts the pathway to that. We offer those integrations with you all, and then they can further look for other services in which they want to add on. I want to talk about another product, particularly for compliance officers out there, or any of those who are feeling daunted and overwhelmed about all of these regulations and rule changes and saying, can I get, this is, TLDR, too long, didn't read, I need something more. I need bookmark. What are these components? You all have a great solution called Compliance Guide 2.0. I highly encourage compliance officers and our legal colleagues as well to take a look at that service that you all have. And tell us a little bit more about it, but it really helps all those telecommunication laws shrink it for something that's more accessible. If you need to check a few things or make sure you want to look up what's the date for the following or what's the timeline for this or all of those pieces, but it's a great tool and would love you to share more about it.
Yeah, if you've ever tried to read the TSR, the TCPA, you need a little bit of time. Bring a sandwich, clear your calendar. There's a lot of data there. But beyond that, more enforcement has come, at least up until last year, at the state level than at the federal level. You had, I think, 49 state AGs band together to create their own task force to try to take down bad actors, because private right of action and TCPA isn't doing anything other than making plaintiffs rich. The federal government doesn't have the manpower or really the priority to really jump on a lot of this. So the state AGs took matters into their own hands and did a very good job going after a lot of bad people. Can't say they didn't create some headaches for the good ones, but I think that their intentions were well placed. But now you've got to keep in mind all the different TSRs, TCPAs, whatever you want to call them, the state telemarketing laws or consumer protection rules that exist in each of the 50 states. So there's a lot to consume there. So what we did is we built a product that takes all those regulations, whether we're talking federal, whether you're talking state, and combines it into a single source. And you can go in and we categorize it by topic, and you could see where those topics apply to you and what matters. So just as a couple easy examples, let's say you're doing call recording. If you're doing call recording, especially on an outbound call, some states require you to get consent to record. That's your two-party consent states. Some do not. When I would design scripts for agents inside of a call center, I would dynamically have my language decide, okay, do I need to get permission to record? Go a step further, and you could look at a state like Connecticut, where there's about 300 disclosures you're now required to give out by law in the first 10 seconds of the call. I would make sure that my script populated that. But getting that information comes from a place like the Compliance Guide, where we make it very easy, and you can just click a button and say, okay, what are the recording laws for the states I call into? What are the holidays I'm not allowed to call into? What are the times of day I'm allowed to call? Because that varies by state. You could be in Kentucky, where you can't start calling until 10, or you can be in, I'll just pick on Indiana again, where I believe you can still do the federal 8 to 9. But they're in 2 time zones, so make sure you're keeping that in tracked as well.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, and I think it's a great tool for those to use and reference for that, because I mean, it's impossible to remember all of the nuances, and then they change and they're different. So you remember a piece of it, but then you say, I need to verify and check, and it's a great tool to pull that in. So I'd like us to include a link on our website as well to the service for you all, because I hear that from compliance officer colleagues looking for a reference to something like that, and then I direct them to the tool that you all have, which is great.
I get questions from my sales team all the time saying, hey, what's the exact rule in this? Or I've seen a couple people ask questions about SANS in here. I go to the Compliance Guide, screenshot it, and send the answer to my sales team. I'm kind of like, hey, you can check the Compliance Guide for that. But I will tell you, just from a pricing perspective, 1 year of Compliance Guide is cheaper than an hour with some of the best attorneys in the field for TCPA and TSR. So 1 hour of time an entire year of access to the rules and regulations. I'm not saying it replaces the need from an attorney, but those little $400 bills you get for that 15-minute, 20-minute question, a lot of those might go away with this compliance guide.
Yeah, it's a great reference. And I think even the inverse, it helps efficiency or more deeper dive when you're going with legal input, because you've checked some of those parts that you've already known that you have in place then. So it's great there. Before we shift to some questions, I know we have a number of questions in there. It's usually a good time to sort of take some key takeaways from a conversation part of ours. I'll start the first one. I really want to drive home as a key need to know from all of the TCPA updates and TSR updates that lead sellers and buyers and call centers records, you need to have in possession the consent to contact transaction. Trusted Form is a great solution for that. You know, something that captures the notice language, the opt-in, how it was presented, all the data around it. It's a great solution for that. And so it's just becoming critical and foundational for all those pieces. Like I said, operates on web forms, first party, third party, mobile app, and lead ads. It's great for TCPA defense, and then proactive lead risk decisioning. I encourage compliance officers to say, go take a look at the consent transactions that you have, do an occasional audit or check. You can automate that process as well, but take a look at the transactions that are coming in so you could better assess your risk of third-party leads that you're assessing. Isaac, key takeaways from you from our conversation here today for everyone.
Everything's changing quickly. So make sure you've got a good compliance strategy that includes qualified counsel. Number one priority, make sure at least once a year you're doing an in-depth review to make sure you're doing it. That little bit of prevention can go a very long way. Make sure that your technology partners are providing you with what you need. Make sure you're aligning yourselves with the proper companies like ActiveProspect that can help make sure that you've got at least legitimately completed leads, and that there is proof that that lead was completed in the way it should have been. Make sure that you're scrubbing against the do not call list as it applies to your business. Always be checking the reassigned number database. Always be checking litigator scrubs, because litigators do go out there and fill out lead forms, because then they want you to prove that you consented. And a lot of times it's cheaper for you to pay them off than it is for you to go through the process of proving that. So make sure you're scrubbing those people out of your database. And make sure that you're attending a lot of webinars and events. Webinars like this are incredibly informative. A lot of people see me as an expert. I attend every one of these webinars as a viewer because the information is incredibly valuable. And even if it's a topic I've heard and a speaker I've heard talk about it before, I come again because there's always some new takeaway I've got. Go to the trade shows. Network with the people there. Make sure you're listening to what's being said. Don't just go to the bars. You'll find me there after hours, I guarantee you. But during the session time, make sure you're going into the sessions. Make sure you're visiting the booth and learning what solutions are out there. A lot of times it's going to raise awareness for you on things you don't have. And then finally, align yourself with the proper industry trade groups. Don't even just pick one. Maybe find a couple. We're at Contact Center Compliance, we're heavily involved with REACH, ECAC. We're getting more involved with ARTA. We're trying to expand our reach across the entire industry because we want to hear the challenges of everybody, and we want to hear the success stories from everybody as well, so that we can try to encourage others to mimic that.
Yeah, excellent. A verbal retweet or repost of everything you just said there, and good plug for REACH, which is the Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment. They're doing great work as a membership association. And the number of the challenges and things that we're talking about in operating in this ecosystem and space, putting those things up front and center as these rules are changing fast and furiously. Isaac, so we've gotten some good questions in there. Have you taken a look at some of those? A lot of them are centered around call center areas. Is there a good one you'd like to highlight and add?
Well, I'm going to go with the first one on the list is, if you use local presence, does the FCC or carrier consider that as call spoofing? And that's a fantastic question. So local presence, if you don't know what that is, local presence is where you try to generate a caller ID on your phone, or on the caller's phone, or the called party's phone, that is similar to or in the same general area as them. The first question is that legal?
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, it is, as long as you meet the requirement where they can turn around, call you back, find out who you're calling or who you are, why you called, and get put on your do not call list. So that's got to be there. If that's not there, don't do it. It's not a legal application. Outside of that, there's one state, I want to say it's North Carolina or South Carolina. One of the Carolinas prohibits you from using their caller IDs unless you have a physical presence in their state. So make sure that you're taking that into consideration. Beyond that, do they consider that call spoofing or spamming? Really depends on what carrier you're talking to. Some frown upon that very heavily. Others say, oh, if you use a toll-free number, we're going to mark you as a spammer. They can't quite make up their mind, but that's the beauty of our remediation product, is that we will identify that you have been flagged as spam, and we go to the carriers and we say, hey, this is a company that CCC attests to as being a good actor. They're not a spammer. Get them off the list, and we're able to drop them right away. So studies are still showing that the local presence is generating a higher answer rate. So I don't know if I would necessarily encourage anybody to stop using that, but be paying attention to the changes in regulations, as I think a lot of states are looking at making that illegal. And if you follow our blogs or our webinars at dnc.com, we cover a lot of that as well. We're going to have a webinar on our remediation product, I think, actually later this week, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
That's interesting. I did not know the term when I saw local presence. I didn't know. I said, I don't know what that is. That completely makes sense to me. I receive those calls as a consumer and saying, oh, someone's calling me from my hometown area that I grew up in, and I could see where that would lead to picking up phone calls, and then often surprised as like, wait, this isn't from someone from my regional localized hometown. Very interesting. Local presence. Again, learn something there as well. So that's a great one. Another question do you think is interesting? What else is out there?
Well, I saw one about how do we access our SAN. A SAN is something, your subscription account number, you get that from the FTC. So you go to the FTC's website, you sign up for your SAN, and there's a cost associated with it. It's going to be tied to the number of area codes that you dial into. At some point, it becomes less expensive to just buy the national license than it does to buy it for each individual area. But you get that directly from the FTC. And if you were to come to us and you were to sign up with us for our Do Not Call scrubbing product, that's going to be the first thing we ask you when we're onboarding you is, okay, where's your SAN? There's about a 2-week turnaround time, I've heard, to get that SAN number. So if you don't already have a SAN number, make sure you start that process right away, because that is, again, if you are scrubbing without a SAN, if you've got a provider who's not requiring you to use a SAN, you are not scrubbing legally. And I can back that up with the FTC's website. So that's where you get that.
Okay. Yeah, I've even heard, I believe in the discussion, that it's used as like, if you don't have a SAN number or don't know what that is, then obviously you're not scrubbing against the DNC list. So case closed potentially.
Right.
Like that was an easy one.
Right.
So let's start with that and make sure that that's in place.
I saw another one where somebody asked if call center compliance has a way to monitor opt-in consent when someone opted out of the new national do not call list. So if somebody's, and I want to make sure, if they opt out on the national do not call, so they're opting out because they don't want to get any more calls. So one, you're going to need a well-attested lead form that shows that they provided consent. If you can prove, if you've got that lead form that shows they provided consent, then you are allowed to call them. Now, keep in mind that consumer can revoke that consent at any time. They can revoke it within 5 seconds of giving that consent. So make sure you have a process to honor those requests. But as long as you have proof of consent that someone opted in to be called, even if they're on the do not call list, you're good to call them until they revoke it. As Ben was saying earlier, make sure the language is good. Make sure the language is clear and conspicuous. And there's a lot. There was a huge enforcement action from the FTC last year, and a lot of it touched on gray patterns where people were, according to the FTC, I want to use the word allegedly as much as I can. According to the FTC, the companies were using deceptive practices to get that consent. So make sure, again, you've got the right attorney that is looking into that, and that is that's doing all that consent gathering and is showing the right language. Eric Troutman, I saw him speak at Oh gosh, it was some event in Denver last year, and he covered one of the people, the focus of the FTC action. And I hadn't actually had a chance to read the allegations or see the screen prints, and it was scary, the stuff that was being put up there, because it was clearly a violation, but the words were there. So I could see how the company creating the leads was like, oh yeah, no, we're getting the consent, we're getting consent. I think the right attorney would have looked at that and said, no, this won't fly. Sometimes it comes down to the color of font you're using, and that invalidates your consent language. So get that reviewed.
Yep. Much agreed. And trusted form solution can help because it documents the whole. We're not running site-wide. We're running on that particular form, capturing the transaction, the language, and everything as it was presented as the individual moves and fills out the form. So it's a great key piece of documentation for that. But again, encourage compliance officers to build processes to check that and seek legal advice to make sure you have your language that properly considers your industry and where you're operating.
Another great question in here. You answered this question earlier, but the use case was slightly different than ours. We're a contact center. Oh, it moved. we're a contact center scrubbing. Let's say we're a contact center that wants to start scrubbing our clients' lists of their past customers. We're scrubbing because some customers transacted more than 18 months ago. Must we use our SAN number, or must we use our client SAN number? We're not interested in buying all SANs and simply using ours, but don't know if that's legal. Thanks. Wonderful question. And I love it when people are thinking like this, because they're getting into the technical side of it. And the technical side of it is where you can make or break of your business. The answer is you have to use your client's SAN number. So when you're scrubbing on behalf of the seller. The seller isn't the person doing the pitch, which in a traditional sales word, you think that's a salesperson. The seller, according to the FTC, is the company providing the product or service that is being billed. So that is the true seller. You need their SAN number. So when I worked for a large BPO and I had clients like SiriusXM, Bank of America, Discover Card, I used each of their individual SAN numbers when I was scrubbing for them. So in the DNC.com portal, what you'll do is you'll build campaigns, and you can assign the SAN numbers to those campaigns. So you have a clean way to differentiate a SAN number for company A or company B. But bottom line is you need to be using your client's SAN numbers when you're scrubbing their leads.
Okay, excellent. Any other good questions there?
I see a couple people have asked that question. Let's see if there's other ones. Somebody asked a question about 10 days to check the DNC and not 30. There's been a recent crackdown on or tightening of that, and that was in one of the NPRMs last year. I think that the appetite of the FCC originally was to push that to be like a 24-hour scrub. Which a lot of businesses freaked out about. I could tell you that if you use our technology, 24 hours isn't a problem. Heck, 24 minutes isn't a problem. But yeah, they have shortened it to 10 days, and I believe that is in effect already.
Okay, I see one I can answer as well. Can you mention information about the new one-to-one consent option that will be required in the near future? So yeah, so this is in the space of came out of the FCC's rulemaking in January. And one of the components is one-to-one consent requirements. This directly impacts those that are in lead generation for comparison sites. So you would land on a website and would say, I'm interested in hearing about more about a particular product or service. The individual would fill in their information, and the website would say, thank you. Look forward to receiving phone calls or text messages with more information about that. The FCC says, don't like that model, has found some abuses that are around in that space that are documented. So looking for or directing folks to have more of a one-to-one consent process. So where the individual is involved in the choice of choosing who they would like their information shared with and who they would like to contact them back. ActiveProspect has a model which we've presented called Ping Pick Post, which is a model to help address that for those comparison sites. That is a lead a lead generation engine. I mean, that's a huge area and market space. And so they were concerned around that. But this changes that, in our view, lets the model continue to operate, but it puts the consumer in the front seat of making a choice and choosing who they want to hear from and where their information can be shared. So that's become known as the one-to-one consent requirement. So thank you for that question. And any other last questions before we close out to what's coming up next for us, Isaac?
I saw one in the chat where somebody was saying there's a new issue where somebody's filling out a form, they're using trusted form, but it's not the customer. There's a real lead, there's a phone number, but how do they know that that's not the customer? How do they protect themselves? So the biggest things I could recommend you there are, one, make sure you're using some sort of right party ID, and this was from Amy Olson. I'm only saying your name because you did this on the public chat, but make sure that you're doing some sort of validation on the lead to make sure that it is truly the person you want to talk to. Some sort of right party ID. We do have a service with that we can help with that. A litigator scrub is also a great one to use because a lot of people that are faking these leads are litigators. And we will see that phone number is a litigant, and we'll scrub that out. Beyond that, make sure you've got your proof of consent so that if you have, and this goes back to, and this is a great way to end it, what I said at the beginning, defendable position. If you can show that you did the right party ID check, you've got the trusted form, you've got all these checks that you put in place to try to guarantee you were acting in a compliant fashion, it's going to go a very long way for you.
Excellent, excellent. And so we've got some events coming up next. Isaac, right? You're going to be at LeadsCon and presenting there as well, correct?
Yes, I'll be moderating a panel about lead generation metrics and what matters most. Got a great panel lined up and very excited to talk about that. As my first of 3 weeks in a row in Vegas at conferences.
Right, running the gauntlet.
Exactly.
And of course, ActiveProspect is going to be at LeadsCon as well. We'll be exhibiting in booth 1124. So look for us. We'll also have meeting rooms available to meet with clients and those that want to talk in more detail about our products and services and are thinking about all of these changes in the regulation and regulatory space. You can also, we'll share a link in the chat here if you wanted to book one of those meetings with one of our team members. And of course, we also have a presenter, Margaret Wise, our Chief Revenue Officer, is going to be giving a presentation about 5 engagement principles to improve online lead generation. So should be a great couple of days of content and networking connections in Las Vegas. And so wish everyone best of success out there. And great. Well, thank you all. Isaac, great always seeing you. Always great talking with you, whether it's on a webinar or directly in person. You're a wealth of knowledge and appreciate that and all that you do at Contact Compliance Center. And as we all work together, it's an ecosystem to really help those that are getting, make sure they address these things compliantly, have strategies to solve these challenges. But it's some wonderful opportunities, and we're certainly happy to be presenting and working on those together. So great. Thank you all, everyone.
Thank you for having me.